You know, when we Americans think of Canada, if we think of Canada, we think of it as a very large country with not a lot of people. Nice place to visit, maybe a nice place to grow a family. They keep pointing to it as a socialist healthcare haven, and there we have the Prime Minister Trudeau, the son of a former prime minister, sort of liberal, left center, and things are just kind of peachy keen there and in Canada, but that's not true. In fact, Jew hatred is running rampant in Canada, as it is in so much of Europe, as it is in many of our universities and colleges. But in Canada, it's unbelievable what's taking place there. In a piece I read and I posted, The Explosion of Jew Hate in Trudeau's Canada. And it's really an incredible piece that I commend to you by Terry Glavin. It's in the Free Press. But Terry is a Canadian author and journalist and a columnist with the National Post as well. Terry, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm doing fine. This is an exceptional piece. It's a long piece. You point out in the piece that what's going on in Canada is not anecdotal. It's really systemic. Explain to the American people what is going on in Canada.
Oh, gosh, where do you want to begin?
Beginning.
What's going on in Canada, it's very difficult to capture for Americans particularly, because there's an idea of this country that Americans generally have. It's generally a very benign view, and we're sort of, quiet, self-effacing, we're unarmed, and
right.
The difficulty that Canada, we've always had a bit of a difficulty in that we are a bilingual, multicultural, constitutional monarchy, very thinly populated, very decentralized federation, spread out on top of the most, dynamic, culturally dynamic nation states in the history of the world. And so it's always been kind of difficult for us to have a conversation of our own. And maintaining some sense of social cohesion and national unity has been the primary sort of function of the Prime Minister's office. And we have a Prime Minister who came to office with the notion that there is no central cultural ethos in Canada, that we are a post-national state with no core identity. And, this is all very she and it's all very interesting. But what happens in that kind of a mindset is that, for instance, how do you do national security in a post-national state? Another very difficult challenge in this kind of an environment is what if you have a prime minister who's actually quite intimately associated with the People's Republic of China and with Chinese business interests, who believes that we should have essentially no borders. And, I don't know, it'd be interesting to kind of do the comparison with the United States, because I know Americans are very vexed and worried about illegal immigration.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your numbers are exactly, but there's about 41 million people in this country, roughly. And close to 5 million people in this country are here on various kinds of visas that expire within a year. And there's absolutely no, I think, reasonable expectation that they're all simply going to go home. We have seen, since the Trudeau government came into power 10 years ago, rents have doubled, prices are absolutely out of control, house prices. There's all these people here, God bless them, but there's nowhere to put them, there's no room for them in the economy. And then we have, just as an example, by the federal government's own guess, up to 500,000 people in this country who are here illegally. I think the last count was 240,000 asylum claims that have been filed within the country by visitors, and it takes an average of 44 weeks for any single asylum claim to be adjudicated. And then we don't know what happens to them after it's suggested to them that they might want to leave. Mm-hmm. So into this kind of strange post-national mix, you have, coming out of the universities primarily, I don't know how to describe it. An ideology might be dressing it up a little bit too much, but an ideational package of a kind that has kind of gone from the bottom of to the top of institutions throughout Canadian society that understand this country as a racist apartheid settler state. This is something that has emerged over the last, since the 1970s, as an understanding on the radical left and the Islamist left of what Israel is. And so, suddenly out of the blue, you have these monstrous atrocities October 7th of last year. And the next thing you know, you have thousands of people marching in the streets, celebrating the barbarism of what is arguably the most hideous theocratic fascism on the planet. Mm-hmm. And I think the Jews of this country are a bit shell-shocked. I spent a lot of time, I've been covering this story for a long time. There's a kind of a unique Canadian anti-Semitism. But I can tell you that I don't know any, and it's my job to find out what the hell is going on. And I think it's a fair statement that Canada's Jews are disconsolate. They are afraid, increasingly. There's been a 670% increase in the incidence of anti-Semitic events, anti-Semitic incidents across the country over the past year. And basically, I try to explain this, and I document this, and I try to explain this in the story in the Free Press.
Terry Glavin is a Canadian author and journalist, a columnist for the National Post, and he's written a really incredible piece, The Explosion of Jew Hate in Trudeau's Canada, in the Free Press here, and I want to quote from it briefly, Terry, so people get a real feel for this in our audience, because our audience cares about this significantly. Since last October 7, there have been several drive-by shootings at Jewish schools in Montreal and Toronto. Coordinated bomb threat targeted more than 100 Jewish institutions from Halifax to Victoria. Synagogues in British Columbia and Quebec have been firebombed. One synagogue in Toronto has been vandalized 7 times since April. Its doors and windows smashed, rocks thrown through the windows. The most recent attack happened just last week. Jewish businesses across the country routinely vandalized. Jews are besieged by pro-Palestinian protesters, quote-unquote, in their own neighborhoods. Jewish parents worry about sending their children to kindergarten. Jewish university students from one end of the country to the other report being afraid to attend class. This sounds like a big crystal knot going on in Canada. And did immigration have some aspect to do with it? Because you pointed out you've had open borders. This guy Trudeau, anybody and anybody can come in. We're seeing this in our own country. We're also seeing foreign terror groups and countries funding these enterprises, these activities going on in our country. Similar things in Canada, I assume, yes?
Yeah, but I think, part of it is that it's the federal funding, the federal government's funding that is worth looking at. One of the things that this government has decided to do is to kind of distinguish itself as being anti-racist in the, how to put this, the post-colonial sense of that term. Mm-hmm. And so, we have this sort of vast federal infrastructure of funding and set-asides and programs that enable NGOs of various kinds, certain Muslim associations, one of which is intimately associated with the teachings of Hassan al-Banna, of the founder of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, It really sort of goes on and on and on. When you find that and this is the thing that I think is the.
And by the way, I want the audience to know this is in your article. Go ahead, I'm listening.
Yeah, it's the thing to keep your eye on. I think is that Canada's Jews, they turn to the police. They turn to their government. They turn to their attorneys general for some protection, and they find that the government itself is kind of imbued with this ideology, and we have there's only about 350,000 Jews in Canada. One of the larger diaspora populations outside Israel. But you've got 1.8 million Muslims, and half of them have arrived in the last 10 years or so, more than half. And it's a very difficult conversation. I have to say that, I have a lot of, because of the work that I do and the work that I've done in Afghanistan and Syria and my Iranian friends, we have to be very careful not to sort of tar the Muslim community. There's really no such thing. There's several Muslim communities with this brush. But when you look at the attitudinal surveys, you find very disturbing findings that, a significant proportion of Muslims in this country, Muslim immigrants in this country, think that suicide bombing is okay, that Israel doesn't have a right to exist, that Israel is an apartheid state. And unless you've got, so going back to what I was saying at the outset, a very strong and stable sense of who you are as a people, as a country, if it's kind of, to be Canadian can mean whatever you want it to mean. Unless you've got that kind of very clear notion of what is beyond the pale and what is within the realm of legitimate opinion and debate and so on, then these kinds of, I think anti-Semitism is an unavoidable result. It's complicated. I mean, one of the ways I've tried to put it is this phenomenon is not wicked because it's anti-Semitic. It's anti-Semitic because it's wicked. It's an inevitable result of, if you don't, if the truth can mean anything, then the truth will be owned by whoever has the loudest voices, the deepest pockets, and the shiniest boots. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're having with the Jews in this country are having to confront this. It's not just that there's a sort of torn fabric. There's something very, very nasty that's been woven directly into the fabric of this country.
You talk about, and you have on this program, and it's certainly insinuated in the article about this this sort of fusion of the left and the anti-Semites, or as I call it, sort of a fusion on our college campuses of the Marxists and the Islamists. Yeah. And this really is a huge problem in your country, in our country, and throughout Europe, isn't it? This is, you look at our Congress, you have
this is very true, yeah.
We've
seen this for...
Yeah. Go ahead.
This goes back about 25 years, actually, and it has a very distinct institutional origin in Canada, this thing that you might describe as a kind of an alliance between the post-objective, the decent left, it's become indecent, and there's a kind of alliance between that left and Islamists, and it's very powerful. And then the other thing that you see coming up through the middle is the normalization of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, which is, of course, I think, the contemporary iteration of anti-Semitism, and it sort of becomes normalized in the popular culture, in the institutional culture, in the culture of the public service and the public sector unions and the social sciences and humanities faculties. And It goes right to the top. And, I should say, I try to tell my Jewish comrades, chin up, this government is dead. Justin Trudeau is a dead man walking. There's only about 20% of Canadians who have any affinity with him at all anymore. There's going to be an election next year. And I'm not a sort of conservative partisan by any stretch of the imagination. But I would say that the Conservatives will win in a landslide. I don't know how Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, is going to be able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I think it's going to be extremely difficult. But that's the situation we're facing. Maybe it's a bit of a cautionary tale for Americans. I don't know. But it is not the country. Canada is not the country that we're not the neighbor that you're used to.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I mean, I remember Stephen Harper, from my perspective, was an outstanding prime minister, and he was openly pro-Israel, openly, and even on the international scene. And now you go from that to Trudeau. That's quite a hop, skip, and a jump, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about Canada is that, we've always been internationalists, right? And outwardly, our brand has been human rights, and the United Nations is kind of in our DNA. And when you've seen over the last 20, 30 years the emergence of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation at the international level, the rise of the police state bloc at the United Nations, the subversion of the United Nations Human Rights Council, and so on, this really does have an impact on the way Canadians see the world. And, we've always, unfortunately, it's been here for a while. We had the world's first Israel Apartheid Week was in Toronto. That was about, what was that now? Is that 20 years ago, 15 years ago? And, of course, it spread to 60 cities around the world. We had a boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement in this country even before the Palestinians.
Unbelievable.
So, it is going to be a very interesting exercise in trying to put this country back together again, to be able to accommodate people. It's really tragic. I mean, we used to have a consensus, a cross-political consensus, Conservatives, New Democrats, Liberals, about immigration. We're very open to immigration. We loved the idea of immigrants coming to this country and, making something of themselves and their lives. We took great joy in it. And unfortunately, that consensus is broken. And I really don't know. It's not going to be fun.
Well, my friend, I'm going to have to go. I've got a heartbreak. This has been a fascinating discussion. Your article is so compelling and so beautifully explained in the Free Press, and we're going to be following you now that we've gotten to talk to you, know you a little bit. Just extraordinary reporting, and I want to thank you very much for coming on the program this evening.
Well, thanks for your interest.
All right. Well, God bless you, my friend.